welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I, along with my 9-month-old child, are going to break down the Ottawa Senators and the Los Angeles Kings. If you hear a baby in the background, it isn't Justin. It's actually my baby. So
I figured the baby would have been you, if anything, after Toronto. My goodness.
True. I was legitimately whining and I was throwing a hissy fit. I texted you and said I might actually consider becoming a Red Wings fan because I don't know how much of this I can take. And I really started to think, I was like, if I had just been a Red Wings fan when I moved to Michigan in 1995, I could have had the best hockey life anyone could ever ask for. I have 4 Stanley Cups and be in 6 finals. Lots of conference finals. I know, right? That's what I'm saying. And now I'm raising my kid to be a Leafs fan, and that might be the biggest sin of all.
Oh, boy. See, you're not even giving her the freedom of choice here. That's just, that's rough.
I think that I'm, if you had asked me like 5 years ago, I would have said no. My kid can't be a Red Wings fan. But now I think I'll say, hey, you can be a Red Wings fan and a Leafs fan, and that's fine. But if they play each other in the finals or the playoffs, you have to be a Leafs fan. That'll be my only caveat.
That's fair. Okay, I'll take it.
I'm willing to. I don't want to be like my dad, who told me I had to hate the Red Wings, and while it was very fun. It has been fun at times when people just get randomly angry at you because you don't like their team. That's an enjoyable moment, but at the same time, I think I probably could have enjoyed more moments had I just not been a hater. I was a straight hater. So I have a shirt that says "Red Wings suck, go Leafs go" that I made. So if that tells you anything. Well, we have the Ottawa Senators and the Los Angeles Kings. Let's start with the Ottawa Senators. What was your take on the way that their season ended?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I was actually quite impressed with the way the season went. I know, all things considered, they definitely finished a lot higher in the standings than I think you and I both expected them. I mean, you look at the end of the season there, they finished actually 23rd in the NHL as far as point totals go. And, yes, they had a whole bunch of youngsters in there. They didn't score a ton of goals, and they certainly had a lot of issues with goaltending. But overall, the growth and the future that I see for this team moving forward, even if Eugene Melnyk is not going to give up another dollar in terms of, money spent towards the cap, this team still has a bright future. They've got, young guys like, Brady Tkachuk and Stützle there that I think really, have put this team on the right path towards, a good future.
Yeah, and the goaltending aside, there's nothing you're going to do as a young team when I'd say veteran goaltenders just don't get it done. That sucks in and of itself, but the fact that you saw such growth out of a lot of those young guys, especially like Tim Stützle, they do have some really nice pieces already that are beginning to mature on the back end and at the front end. So there's a lot to be excited about as a Senators fan. I think you said it best is this team going to be willing to spend money? And I suspect that when they are ready to go and when they are actually showing signs of being competitive, that Melnyk, like he did in, probably at this point like 6-7 years ago when the Senators went to the conference finals and almost made it to the Stanley Cup finals, he wasn't afraid to spend a little bit of cash. I think that it just came to this point where, well, this team isn't any good, and why would I spend money on a team that's not any good right now? Like, let's just bear down and spend less. So I'm hopeful that he'll become the owner we hope he will become.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of spending cash, they've got a big RFA coming up this offseason in Brady Tkachuk. And you want to talk about a guy for me who I could potentially see as the next captain for this team. 36 points in 56 games this year. And he's been, the last 2 seasons putting up at least 44 points. And I think that's only going to get better for him moving forward. And not to mention the offensive production, but he just brings that grit, that sandpaper. I think that, a lot of NHL teams would just love to have. And, for me, I think this guy just has leadership written all over him. And so if you're hoping to keep him around for the long term, especially if you want to try to get him to an 8-year contract, or, if you're going to try to not buy out some of his UFA years and keep him to a short-term deal, this could, potentially cost you a few bucks. And again, we talked about the wallet there for the Senators, and they may have to shell out a couple bucks here for this guy. But luckily for them, really, he's the only big name UFA or RFA that's coming off the books this summer. So they really don't have to go out and spend on any other, type of player outside of this guy. And of course, they'll probably want to bring in, some free agents here or there. But for the most part, this is the guy that they have to spend the most money on, I feel like, this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, Brady Tkachuk is the heart and soul of the Ottawa Senators. I think that, you look Matthew Tkachuk and Brady Tkachuk, there's something special about these brothers. And I think that Ottawa, I don't know if it's going to cost a ridiculous amount for Brady Tkachuk. I don't think you're talking like Mitch Marner kind of money, or I think you're probably looking in the range of around $7 million.
Absolutely, him. I agree. Yep.
And I don't see them not being willing. I mean, look at what they gave to Shabbat. They didn't hesitate to sign Shabbat to a big deal before he had really played a ton. He only played a couple years in the league. So I think that Brady Tkachuk, no problem. He'll get that somewhere between 7 and 8 million. Maybe he signs a shorter deal because he knows that once the cap begins to go up, he'll be able to get a pricier deal later on. And so it might be less about UFA years and more about, hey, the cap's going to go up and my value will go up because of that, as long as I continue to play the way I am. However, not like Ottawa's up against the cap. So there's not a whole lot to worry about in that sense. They've got $28.4 million in cap space for next year. So they're doing just fine.
Yeah.
I guess, there are some other players that they are going to need to re-up. I mean, Drake Batherson, he had a good end to the year. So there's definitely, it's not that Brady Tkachuk's the only one left. The nice thing is that, you've got Derek Stepan, who's going to become a UFA. And even if he does re-sign in Ottawa, he's not re-signing for $6.5 million. Artem Anisimov is gone. He's $4.5 million. Ryan Dzingel, I mean, for what it's worth, it seems like he has the most success when he's in Ottawa. So he might be better off just staying and signing, maybe just like a 1-year show me kind of deal. Really, since he was putting up 40 points a couple years in a row for the Senators, and he actually had a 56-point season in 18-19. He's kind of come back down to earth. So potentially he signs that 1-year deal there or somewhere else where he maybe will get a little more recognition because he's not playing on a. I won't say Ottawa's bad. I think we're gonna go into next year and they're gonna be the team that everybody talks about that's going to surprise everyone, right? Like. It does. You look up and down the league. Find me one team that you think could surprise you next year and make the playoffs out of nowhere. I think Ottawa will be a pretty good candidate for that. The problem is, they played all these games down the stretch and they meant nothing. And those games, there's just something about those games when they mean nothing. And then when all of a sudden the next year, the playoffs and everybody's talking about, oh, you're the favorites and, oh, you can make the playoffs. And that's when these types of teams still need another year, maybe 2, to really become a playoff contender. Now, they could slip into the playoffs, but depending on what this team does in the offseason, I just don't think that they have the back end to get into the playoffs in this, what will be the Atlantic Division once again.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. They're going to be in a tough division back in the Atlantic next year, and the odds of them obviously making the playoffs are going to be small. But I will say, for all the faults this team may have on the back end, they do kind of have a bright spot as far as youngsters go, and that's Philip Gustafsson. a minor league goalie at 23 years old. He came up for about, I think it was 9 games this season, and he put up some pretty good numbers. I think, 9 games, 933 save percentage, 2.16 goals against, and for a team that, again, struggles defensively. And, again, this team was fun to watch. They seemed to be in it all the time, especially I know I tried to watch a lot of the Maple Leafs Senator games, and it always seemed very, very close, right, which was just super exciting for me. And, I think if this team can really keep things close for a lot of games next year, if they get solid goaltending out of Gustafsson and maybe Matt Murray finds his game again somehow, I think really this team could potentially contend for a few games and, maybe push a team, or push a game or two towards the end of the season where maybe they're a few points out and, maybe be on the bubble there. But obviously it is going to be difficult. But I think, again, they're a team that surprised a lot of people because, like I said, they were expected to finish at the bottom. And I think next year, again, if they do contend and, even get close to the playoffs, they're going to be a team that you're going to say, hey, who are these Senators?
Yeah, I just look at it and go, Boston going to miss the playoffs? Toronto? Tampa? Florida now? There's a lot in that division that you have to be scared of, along with, the Montreal Canadiens. There's another team that now is coming out of nowhere and sweeping the Winnipeg Jets, and they're in the semifinals, and you're going to look at them as a playoff team next year. So, the way that I see it, this division's got 5 playoff teams. And then when you consider what's going on in the East Division, the Metro. The Metro,
yeah.
Once the Metro returns, maybe you see the Capitals taking a step back, and I don't know if anybody sees the Capitals missing the playoffs outside of Ovechkin deciding, never mind, I don't want to play here anymore, which I don't foresee. Some of these teams, the Penguins, do you see them missing the playoffs? Do you see the New York Islanders missing the playoffs? No, I bring up those other the teams in that division because at some point those teams are going to also start filling up the wild cards. And for me, I don't think the Ottawa Senators are quite there yet. And I think it's a good thing because I think another year of growth, but still finishing in the bottom of the pile is beneficial for them because this team still can, should be using their and getting high draft picks, top 10 picks, where, you're not going to hit on every top 10 pick either. So, hey, this year they hit on a guy, next year they don't, or vice versa. But you need to have that high-end talent coming in to really compete in this division long term. And my one question mark about a lot of their prospects, the guys that are coming in, I think a lot of them are probably more second line guys when all is said and done on a really good team. A Batherson's probably more a third line guy. Stützle, he might be a first line center. But other than that, I don't know how many of these guys are high end goal scorers. That's kind of what Ottawa's missing still, is those high end goal scorers. And if you could grab one in the draft and be looking for guys that can score goals, I think you're going to be in a good place. Side note, Connor Brown in the World Championships for Canada was just lights out. So maybe he comes back and is a new man for the Senators. 35 points in 56 games isn't bad, but Connor Brown took the big mantle in those World Championships. And sometimes we see those World Championships actually spark a guy the next year in the regular season after getting some success. It's got to be nice going from a losing Senators team and going and winning gold in the World Championships, especially after they lost the first 3 games.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about this team's let's talk about their goaltending for a second. You mentioned Matt Murray. He turned things around. Now, Matt Murray was hurt, so there's that. But in the Senators games that you watched, what did you see that was wrong with Matt Murray? What's going on with this guy that just a couple years ago was so good? Yeah,
obviously we know he kind of had a fallout with Pittsburgh, which led to them getting rid of him, and he went off to the Senators. But to me, really what was wrong with his game is he was trying too hard, right? And so you see him all over the ice. He didn't look stable, right? Like, because I look at another Canadian team and the Montreal Canadiens, right? I've been watching Carey Price a lot in these playoffs. And, again, he hasn't gone out and necessarily stolen, a series yet out of these first 2 rounds, and he hasn't really stolen too many games. But he's been so good positionally that when I look back at a guy like Matt Murray and I say, okay, Matt Murray was just all over the place, and he doesn't look calm. He doesn't look good positionally. And so when you're just trying to hustle, going back and forth, side to side, and you're not set up and you're not positionally sound, obviously that's going to lead to a lot of rebounds, a lot of bad goals. And that's essentially what I saw out of the limited amount of Matt Murray I saw this year. And, when I again look at a guy like Carey Price, who just makes it look so effortlessly, obviously I'm not expecting that level of, positional soundness, but it definitely was nowhere near the Matt Murray of old. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a beautiful analysis, because when he was winning a cup with the Penguins, he was just always in the right place. Always. He wasn't super fancy. He wasn't making insane, out of this world, like Dominic Hasek style saves. He was there. He was in the right position. He cut off the angles. Like, he was playing the puck correctly. And you're right. And maybe some of that is, hey, you're on a young team. Guys aren't playing the way that you want. And so they're opening you up to a little bit more. At the same time, though, it's not like this is new. Some of the reason Pittsburgh was willing to get rid of him was that they saw probably some holes in his game. Particularly, I think that glove side is a hole for him. And so I think, and I mean, I remember talking about that during the playoffs when he was in playoff runs with Pittsburgh, that that was the area that guys were shooting for. So I mean, it's maybe the book's just out on him, and now it's time to come the other way, work on that, and come back. And if Ottawa could get even average goaltending, you're not necessarily wrong in saying that they'd be a playoff contender, assuming the rest of the team plays the way that they did this year. So a very interesting team for sure, the Ottawa Senators. I think they're one of the more fascinating teams for the draft, because they could do a lot at this draft. They could potentially, they've got a lot of young players, and maybe they get involved in something and they try to bring in a younger player in with some cost control to move, any veteran. I mean, you've got Chris Tierney will be a UFA after next year, and he's been a pretty nice piece for Ottawa coming over in that Carlson deal, right? He was the Carlson deal?
Yep.
Yes. Nick Paul will be a UFA. He's done some things for the Senators. So there's a couple guys you could see maybe the Senators looking to make some moves, and potentially I think they'll only be looking for younger guys, but we'll see what they're able to do next year. Shall we go to the LA Kings? Any final thoughts on the Senators? I think where do you think this team kind of is right now?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the team status goes, they're a continue to rebuild team, and I think they maybe got another 3 to 4 years ahead of them before they're really a playoff contender. Okay,
all right, 3 to 4 years. I'm going with 2, because I do think that division is very good right now. I do think that there are some holes coming in the future, because when Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand kind of spend their bodies out, that team isn't gonna, that team's already, they definitely have holes. I mean, Tuukka Rask will be gone likely in the next couple of years, so I think they'll take a turn, and Tampa Bay, they'll probably be good for a minute, but I think Ottawa could compete and sneak in within a couple of seasons, based on what I see from them right now. But okay, so let's go Los Angeles Kings. And this team they've got 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks, Calgary's 4th, and of course their own first-round pick. I'm trying to remember where they're picking at, but they're picking 8th in this upcoming draft. So a nice high pick, and the Los Angeles Kings kind of just, they had a little bit of a surprising middle of their season where they almost kind of made a push for the playoffs, and it pretty quickly evaporated. To me, this is like a hodgepodge team. I don't know what this team is. I don't know what they're trying to be other than we're trying to get faster. I get that. But there's not really a face to me anymore. Anze Kopitar is supposed to be, Drew Doughty's supposed to be, but it doesn't feel like they almost doesn't feel like they fit there anymore for some reason.
Yeah, I think the problem is, right, when we look at guys like Kopitar, Dustin Brown, Drew Doughty, we think of the old, Mr. Sutter's, LA Kings, those cup-winning teams, right? Those grinded out, forecheck you to death teams that are going to beat you 2-1, 1-0. But obviously that's not this team anymore, right? Jeff Carter gets shipped out mid-season to the Pittsburgh Penguins and looks really good there. But, again, I think what this team has going for them, is the fact that they don't have to necessarily rush if they don't want to, because I think they to me have probably a top 3 prospect pool as far as NHL teams are concerned. So they've got a lot of really, really good pieces coming up. I mean, we talked about it. Alex Turcotte, he can be a potential Anze Kopitar replacement here in a couple of years. He has just a fantastic two-way game and only 20 years old. And then, of course, there's Quentin Byfield, the 18-year-old center who I think next year can step in and be that number 2 center for this team to replace Jeff Carter's absence. And, again, they've got some other young guys in the system as well. And, again, this team has a lot of good pieces that could potentially step in the next, 1 or 2 years and potentially put this team back in a playoff race, because let's not forget, when we go back to the old divisional format, they're in a pretty weak division as far as teams are concerned.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. They definitely they have the pieces coming and the potential. They've got lots of potential. I mean, any team that's been bad for 3 years all of a sudden has potential because they have players that were ranked high in drafts. I guess I'm wondering, hey, what are we doing with Anze Kopitar? Are we trying to just hang on to him until we're good again? Or is this something that, are we going to start exploring maybe what this can look like long term? Like, I guess the way that this team is built right now is just, it really feels very hodgepodgey. So I have a hard time getting a real gauge for the LA Kings. And maybe that really all starts on their back end. Their goaltending is just, it's been Jonathan Quick, and Jonathan Quick has not been good for a minute. It's been a while since he's really been a competitive goalie. I'd say like 17, 18 is really the last time he had a good season. And I don't see him getting any better. So you've got him for 2 more years. I mean, maybe he's the guy that you look to move. If you're willing to eat half of his salary, perhaps you can move Jonathan Quick. And really, that to me is the start of the rebuild, is like, get rid of your vintage goalie that everyone loves, but he's not good anymore. It's time to get rid of him. Let him go be a backup somewhere, which he probably would be an okay backup. But you got to do something to this team to kind of say we're moving on here. Like, maybe that's what it is with this LA Kings team. They haven't moved on from what they were. I mean, at this point, 8 years ago? 7 years ago, they won 14, right?
Yeah,
12 and 14.
It's been a few minutes.
It's been so long, and we're still seeing these mainstays, and I think one of them needs to go in order to really like tip these scales and to just give this team a new, fresh look. I think it's time to and probably the easiest one to move is Jonathan Quick or Dustin Brown. Dustin Brown to me is just kind of, he maybe is that guy who's just going to be an LA King forever. Yeah, maybe he'll just, after his deal's over, he'll just keep signing a couple $1 million deals and just stay with the Kings for as long as he can play. But I think it's time to move on from one of these big three: Drew Doughty, Anze Kopitar, and Jonathan Quick. And Quick probably the easiest candidate to move at only $5.8 million.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. I mean, he's not the goaltender he once was, and I think, like you said, if there's any candidate, I think that's easy to move. It's going to be quick. Obviously, if you're the LA Kings and you basically have two schools of thought right now. Either you're going to start a rebuild because you do, like I said, Turcotte, Byfield, you have a lot of really good young pieces.
But you don't think they've started a rebuild?
Well, I mean, not necessarily rebuild. I think they're acquiring the right pieces while they're still, I don't want to say trying to be competitive, but they're just kind of floating by, right? They're just floating down the river at this point. Just, hey, if we're competitive, we are. If we're not, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they had the second overall pick last year, so it's not as if they're, right, constantly picking in the around 11, 12, 13. They had a great pick, and Quentin Byfield looks like he's the real deal.
Right, absolutely. But I think, again, too, but you have to also look at a guy like Anze Kopitar, who, at 33 years old, I don't know how much longer he can keep up what he does at his kind of pace, that 70-point pace. So, do you want to go all in, try to get, acquire some veteran guys who can still produce and have these younger guys still kind of, take over and fill in some holes, much like, Chicago Blackhawks, right, on their most recent cup run. They had the Taves and the Canes, just like the Kopitars and the Dowdies here, but they had young guys coming up who could, the DeBrinkets, who could come in and fill in those holes, in the bottom, the middle six pairs. But so, yeah, to me, I honestly think the best move for the Kings is to just kind of float down the river, right? Let these young guys grow. If the older guys like Dustin Brown, Kopitar produce, then, hey, that's fantastic. But, again, if you want to move away from the old, like you talked about, Quick, to me, I agree with you 100%, is the guy to move, because I think there's still a list of teams out there that, again, they're not necessarily going to take him at 5.8, but I guarantee you at, half that cost at $2.9 million, I can probably name a handful of teams that'd be willing to say, hey, cool, we'll give you a third or fourth round pick, for this guy to come play backup for us, because let's face it, I mean, he's still a capable goaltender. He's won Stanley Cup. So yeah, if maybe he finds a little bit of his game again, he'd be just a fantastic 1B goaltender.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think if the pressure were taken off of him and he played on a good team, I think he could probably be a pretty serviceable guy. And I know he's a great locker room guy. So I think there's a lot that he could still give. I just think it's time for the LA Kings to kind of we need to sever this tie to the 13-14 Los Angeles Kings. The last time the Kings won a playoff game was 2016.
Wow.
They won one game in the first round. And they've only made the playoffs one other time, and they got swept. So since they won the Stanley Cup in 13-14, they have won one playoff game and made the playoffs twice. This isn't a team that has been any good since that cup win. Yes, they've had good players on their teams. Absolutely. Drew Doughty's had some nice seasons. He's been nominated for the Norris. Anze Kopitar's won. He's probably won a Selke or a Lady Byng or something. What has he won?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm sure he's won one of those things. But this isn't a team that's had any success. So why are we holding on to this? What happened 7 years ago? I mean, I understand a few years later, you're still hoping that you can put the right pieces around these guys and they can lift you to the playoffs again. It's just not working. Now, Kopitar had a great season. I mean, he's almost a point per game player the last 2 years. Really, he hasn't really taken much of a step back. I mean, since 17-18, the last 4 years, he's been very good. Almost a point per game player. So I can't knock him on that. I understand wanting to keep him around because you do have guys like Turcotte and Byfield coming up, and you want somebody to be able to mentor them. So I understand him staying, and I think that he probably is a good person to keep around at least for another couple years. A $10 million player is not going to be an easy deal anyways. So it's better, I think, to keep him around, and then when he, maybe 22, 23, 24, when he's got one or no years left on his deal, you deal him as a UFA, or maybe you're good by that point, and then he's your own UFA and he can stay there forever. But I think this team could get, no pun intended, a king's ransom for Drew Doughty if Doughty was willing to move.
Absolutely.
And I know you're not going to just walk into another Drew Doughty, but at the same time, Drew Doughty is not Drew Doughty from 3 years ago. And I think he's a very good defenseman, but are we thinking that Drew Doughty is a top 10 defenseman in the NHL anymore? I don't know. I don't know that he is anymore. And I think that maybe someone out there is convinced that he is, and you could really pull in what you need to begin a rebuild to make the next 5 to 8 years great, as opposed to holding on to him and hoping that when you're good in 3 or 4 years, he'll still be good.
Yeah, that's a tough one because, again, you got a guy in Drew Doughty who's still a capable number one pairing guy on any team in this league. He's a right-handed shot. He still produces, good enough offensively. Obviously not at an $11 million cap hit pace, but, again, he's still a top pairing defenseman. And
oh, absolutely. I'm not knocking what he is right now, but you just you don't need what he is right now. You don't need a number one defenseman when your team's not good. I guess go ahead. My
concern would probably be, say this team is good in the next 2 years with all these, incredible prospects they have. Say they figure out a way to get rid of Jonathan Quick and they bring in a goaltender that actually will, bring some stability to that net. But, you get the pieces up front, and then the only thing you're really missing at that point in a couple of years is a top pairing defenseman, and you've gone off and you've traded him. So, who knows? Maybe, and again, it's even when you trade for a bunch of picks and prospects, it's still hit or miss. You never know what you're going to get. But, obviously in today's NHL with analytics and stuff, usually those top, at least 10, 15, picks at the top of the draft are always going to be hits anyways. But, still, I think there's going to be a number of teams that, would obviously want to take him. But to me, I think the smarter play, if you think you can be competitive in a couple of years, is to hang on to this guy because he's such a good, presence as far as veteran leadership, and he's still a top pairing guy that I think just that's so hard to find right now that maybe it's just not worth moving on from.
Yeah, certainly if you feel like you are going to be a Stanley Cup competitor in 2 years, then don't trade Drew Doughty. But I don't see that for this team. I think this team is 3 or 4 years away, maybe more. I don't really like the way that this team has attempted a rebuild because I don't see them giving very many young players big opportunities. Hey, Gabe Vilardi, yeah, he's been given some opportunities. He had an okay season, and I think there are players that they'll find when they're good that will have been developed in LA. I don't see a whole lot happening right now, and maybe that is COVID. COVID was weird. You're not able to get certain guys in. Where in past years, sometimes late in the season, you would have brought up a guy like Byfield, or you would have brought up some other younger guys to just get a taste, and we didn't get to see that this year. But I can appreciate some of their prospects. I think that the Kings they still are going to need, their veteran guys are going to age themselves out by the time the rest of the guys are ready to go. So to me, they're kind of they're in this middle ground that's ugly and not a fun place to be because your team is not bad enough to, granted they won the lottery, so that was fortunate for them, but they're not bad enough to be really bad. Hey, we're getting a top pick every year for a few years in a row. I just think that one of those guys should go. I don't know who it is, Doughty or Kopitar, maybe both. But to me, this team needs kind of a refresh of who is the leader up front. So
Okay.
But maybe a Dustin Brown and Jonathan Quick's exit are good enough. Okay, so where does this team stand in your mind?
Yeah, to me, this is a continue the rebuild, if you want to call them having rebuild, even though they're just, like I said, kind of floating down the river, acquiring what they get when they get it as far as draft picks are concerned. But I honestly feel, because how weak this division is and how good their prospect pool is, I'm going to say they're 2 to 3 years away as far as making the playoffs and being a potential, playoff threat.
Okay. All right. Hey, Alex Turcotte, if he turns into the guy that you feel like he's going to, then you've got, maybe you don't trade Kopitar, because then you've got Byfield, Turcotte, and Kopitar as your 3 centers. And we know how beneficial it can be to have those 3 high-end centers on your team. I hope that LA becomes good again. Like, it's weird seeing all the California teams just suck.
Right.
So we'll see how all that pans out. And who do you think for the LA Kings? Is there anybody that you think that maybe goes in that expansion draft?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, if I had to just looking at it right off the top of my head and had to just pick somebody without really looking into what I think, other teams are going to offer and what maybe Seattle might want, I could potentially see a Brendan Lemieux getting picked. He's a guy that adds a lot of grit and sandpaper and penalty kill ability in your bottom, 6, and at $1.55 million. Again, I'm sure Seattle's not going to be a salary cap crunch team, but he's a guy that could easily bring back some value. And I know a lot of teams next year, him being an RFA after next season, come playoff time at the deadline, he could be a guy that maybe some teams would be willing to give up a 3rd-round pick for. So if they're looking for a guy that could potentially bring in pieces as far as draft picks are concerned, he could be a guy they could pick up.
Now, do you think that they leave Dustin Brown unprotected?
Oh yeah, I think they will. But
and you don't think that Seattle would want to take Dustin Brown as hey, we can bring in this guy as a flyer, and I mean, they are going to need to take players with bigger salaries, right? Like you need to get to the floor. You can't just have, and nobody wants to have a garbage team anymore. Like, Vegas has set the expectations for an expansion team. So I wonder if Dustin Brown doesn't get nabbed.
But my concern with Dustin Brown is, one, he's slow as frick. But I mean, I think Seattle's going to want to get fast, speedy guys, and I think Dustin Brown is only successful because he plays with an elite center in Anze Kopitar. So if you go out and grab him and he doesn't have someone to dish him the puck and win all those battles down the middle for him, I think he's going to struggle, and I think it's just going to be a waste of money, especially because he's going to be UFA after next season. Again, unless, if LA leaves him, unprotected, and they feel they can get some decent picks back at the deadline for him, then yeah, maybe they do. But honestly, I'm 50-50, but I think LA might protect him. But, again, I think if he's unprotected, I still think that they'll stay away from him. Okay.
All right. I like it. I think that he could be the James Neal of the draft. Remember James Neal with Vegas? I mean, he came out scoring like crazy and everyone loved him in Vegas. And I think, Dustin Brown isn't going to score as many, he wasn't a 40 goal scorer like James Neal was at one point. I think that he would be a good name to bring in. Like, he's won cups, and they're going to need to sell this team. And so bringing in players who have been there before is certainly important, but we will find out. We'll of course do a full expansion draft show, but just thought it'd be interesting to throw that in there. So there is the LA Kings and the Ottawa Senators. Stay tuned for more off-season reports as we move along here and as teams get eliminated. Notice we did 2 because we're falling behind. So, and Justin has to get married next week, so we got to do more shows. So all right, we'll find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Let us know what you think. Let us know where you think your team's going to finish, and we will talk to you soon.